Tolerance is a mortal sin. I stood up as a 12-year-old in Sunday school, before my peers and teacher, and confessed to them all, I did not believe in the Bible. To me, it seemed a load of nonsense. I never saw my teacher again. I was a shy kid who had learned at an early the wisdom of practicing the art of passive resistance. I went to Sunday school religiously, because that was where I was ordered to go, by my mother, but no one could make me believe what I choose not to. My mind has always been my own and a ruthlessly guarded territory. My Sunday school teacher, seeing my passive demeanor, one day chose to hold me up to my peers as the model Christian child. He wanted to mitigate their unruly behavior by comparing it to my own. My peers already knew I was not a Christian, and so my teacher's portrayal of me as a child of exemplary virtue was met with the hilarity only children can express. Whereupon I was asked for my standing before God, and I answered as described above. I spent 48 years as an atheist, enjoying the life of someone without a conscience. It was my research into solutions for social problems that kept me out of trouble, more than any moral virtue. I had little time to be criminal, in a serious way. That, coupled with a phobia for close personal contact and a determination not ever to be separated from my books, led me to live a life of solitude and peace. But by my 30s I had hit an intellectual dead end. I had hit a theoretical impasse and saw no way out. I read the Bible to disprove it, thinking that if I could find a way to demonstrate logical error in it, it would reinvigorate my secular research. But the more I read and reread the Bible, the more the issues I had with it were resolved, and the more I saw a way to resolve problems in the Bible, the more I saw solutions to the problems I had struggled with for some 32 years. Ultimately, I converted to see what that would accomplish. It was a kind of scientific experiment. But it was one verse more than any other that precipitated my conversion. I converted before I was even certain Christ was whom he said he was. I had learned enough from my reading to know I would never fully understand the Bible as an atheist, if it was true. But the verse that precipitated my conversion more than any other was Revelations 3:16. It was better to be hot or cold than lukewarm. Even as an atheist, that made sense to me. God did not want tolerance, and what was more, God was not a tolerant God. Secularists claim God is evil, when in truth he is simply intolerant of the sin secularists embrace. This is where the antipathy towards the living God originates. Christianity is based on faith, but faith is a commitment, and an absolute one at that. A true commitment tolerates no infringement. This is why infidelity is so painful. Sin demonstrates a lack of commitment. Tolerance for your own failings demonstrates a lack of the love that manifests as an inviolate commitment. We cannot claim to have faith, or love, if we are hedging our bets. When we are all in or we are not in love. Cheating on our spouse is one of the least excusable things a person can do. If the third person does not matter, why did we let infidelity destroy what does matter? If the third person matters more than our spouse, why are we not with the one we cheated with? To cheat is to make our spouse a person that does not matter. To cheat is to say that commitments do not matter. To cheat is to say sin is acceptable and has to be allowed for. This is a dilemma no cheater can extricate himself from. He is not just sinning, he is demanding that room be made for sin. To have faith is to have love, and to have love is to have faith. We cannot separate them. If we love God, we have as much faith in him as we have love. They are equivalent. But if we remain doubtful about God, we cannot love him. Those whom we do not love we certainly cannot trust. If there is no trust, it is not possible for relationship to matter. Love is that decision to trust the one loved, and when the trust is broken, the love is poisoned. If we are tolerant of a lover's indiscretion, are we motivated by love, or is there a willingness to tolerate sin? The assumption is that if we are in love, we will tolerate everything to keep our lover. Love means, in the minds of many progressives, we do not condemn. But does this include the taking of drugs or the commission of a capital offense? How many spouses protect their loved one from criminal prosecution? They have made peace with the crimes of their spouse and tolerate what in anyone else's world would be considered abhorrent. Do we think our love absolves a lover's sins? Is it okay to kill, if the person did it out of love? If we are tolerant of everything, we are required to be intolerant of anyone who condemns others? How can we claim we are tolerant, if we permit intolerance? The progressive is always intolerant of anyone who condemns those who sin. No one views a person who stays silent, whilst others are being attacked for their beliefs or race, as the racist is thought intolerant and those who tolerate racist language are also considered intolerant. That is the paradox of progressives' tolerance. To be tolerant as a progressive requires intolerance of anything that is not progressive. If we are tolerant of sin, a progressive must be intolerant of all those who condemn sin. The one thing no one can be is tolerant, as an absolute value. Tolerance is always part of a social agenda. One is not tolerant without a motive and a secondary objective. Those who preach tolerance are tolerant of their hypocrisy. At some point the tolerant must reveal how intolerant they are and the motive behind their claims of tolerance. Someone tolerant of the October 7th terror attack will necessarily be intolerant of the aftermath. If you are tolerant of mass migration and open borders, there is a necessary antipathy towards those who support the rights of native populations. It ought to be observed that no one is tolerant of moral virtue. We do not need to be tolerant of the truth or those who live right. Tolerance is reserved for those who fall short of the glory of God and even of people who have embraced the agenda of Satan. That being so, who are we intolerant of? It can only be those who are evil, or if one is progressive, those who oppose evil. The morally good must oppose evil or they cannot be good. This marks them as intolerant in the minds of those who are tolerant of sin. If you are a person who excuses riots and criminal acts including the illegal entry of migrants into white countries, you are deemed a tolerant person. The other name you will be known by is as a progressive liberal. The intolerant cannot tolerate sin and evil and the tolerant cannot do anything, other than normalize, what the intolerant views as abhorrent behavior. Yet, the tolerant will claim they are only intolerant about what ought not be acceptable. Liberals claim their intolerance extends to racist language and behavior, exclusive language and discriminatory practices. In the liberal mind we are all equal and there are no grounds for favoring one culture or lifestyle over another. But they do exclude Christians from their list of groups they tolerate. But what virtue is there in tolerating what is acceptable to you and being intolerant of that which opposes or is inconsistent with what you favor? Is that not what might be considered normal? It is not impossible to be tolerant about hate speech against Christians and intolerant of hate speech against gender relatives. Because tolerance is not about a lack of preferences or discrimination. It is about the sins of the flesh and an accommodation to them. In other words, tolerance is a cover for your progressive attitude concerning the sins of the flesh. Intolerance is a label progressives attach to people who do not take a liberal view of sin. Progressives are intolerant of Christian morality because it does not accept the sins of the flesh. Even the intolerance for racism and other forms of discrimination is a cover for deeper sin issues. Liberals link these issues with race or some other factor to hide the true argument. Islamophobia is a particularly interesting phenomenon, because it purports to identify a fear of behaviors associated with a group that lives under Sharia law. It is as if Islam was substantially the same as all other religions, but people had an irrational fear of it. But of course, if Islam was a religion like others no one would pay it much attention. It is that it is a religion under the purview of Sharia law. Interestingly, no one accuses its detractors of being Sharia-phobic. To express a concern about anything associated with Sharia law is turned into something called Islamophobic. The elements of Sharia that concerns non-Muslims and some Muslims are not addressed. Instead, a blanket injunction is imposed on all negative responses to the workings of Sharia law. This has perplexed many moral persons, because it appears to be a contradiction of the supposed tolerance of progressives. Sharia law is against progressiveness and the liberal social agenda, even more so than Christians. This confusion is because most people do not understand the issue that concerns progressives the most. We have said that progressives are tolerant of sin. Sharia legitimizes the sins of the flesh and counters them, by providing actions to be taken by the flesh, that sanctify the things to be done under Sharia. Progressives' intolerance for Christians opposing gender neutralization surgeries but tolerance for a religion that executes gays and sexually liberated women, is more than puzzling to the casual observer. But when we embrace the flesh, we must embrace the law as a way to mortify and cleanse the flesh. Tolerance does not mean universal acceptance. The acceptance and tolerance for sin is, in its simplest form, an accommodation with the lusts of the flesh. But the desires of the flesh cannot be unleashed without restraint. Even the most tolerant see the need for some order. This need for order creates the most progressive type of sin, the law. Law not only regulates sin, but law also perpetuates and normalizes sin. Those who enable sin and tolerate it do evil. There is nothing more central to the tolerance and perpetuation of sin than the law. Thus to keep the law, the greater is the fall. The more one honors and venerates the law, the greater the sin of the infraction. Trying to keep the law results in the breaking of the law. The law created to contain sin multiples the sin one is in. Making a New Year's resolution only creates the possibility of failure. The promise is only as good as the commitment behind it. One is doubly condemned. We are condemned for making a rule we cannot keep and for breaking the rule one vowed to keep. The law teaches tolerance. If it is not legal, then it is acceptable. The law teaches and justifies intolerance. If it is illegal, it must not be tolerated. The legal can be changed at will. The law can be edited to transform a society governed largely by common law, to one governed by international law, a law common to all persons everywhere and regulated by a one-world government. To tolerate sin is one thing. To tolerate a society governed by laws that are gradually universalized, is another level of evil. To tolerate a sin because it is personal is one thing. To tolerate sin because it has been made legal by a one-world government, epitomizes evil.